She was, by every medical standard, dead. No heartbeat, no brain activity. Pam Reynolds was on the operating table, and nobody expected her to hear anything because, dead people don't eavesdrop. And yet, she came back, not just back to life, but back with receipts. She told doctors exactly what song they had playing while she had surgery. Hotel California, which, ironic, described the saw they used to open her skull and repeated conversations the surgeons had about her arteries being too small. Except here's the thing. Her ears were plugged, her eyes were taped shut, and her brain was flatlined. She should have been a sensory paperweight, but somehow she remembered. So what exactly happens when we die? Is it all neurons short-circuiting in a blaze of electrical nonsense? Or is there more? Something we can't quite measure, but people keep coming back talking about? In this episode, we're going to explore the one thing that everyone has in common, but nobody really understands: death. Specifically, what happens in that hazy, flickering space between life and whatever may or may not come next. Let's get into it. Let's start with what we do know. Kind of. In 2022, doctors were running an EEG scan on an 87-year-old man who, mid-test, went into cardiac arrest. Not ideal timing, but also perfect timing, scientifically speaking, anyway, because the scan kept going, and what it captured in those final seconds was wild, a burst of gamma brain waves. Those are the kind tied to memory, dreaming, and meditation. Stuff that usually means you're thinking. Which begs the question, why is a dying brain acting like it's rewatching your life's highlight reel? Because that's exactly what it looked like. A final surge, like your brain is putting together a farewell montage. Add in some Coldplay, and you've got the end of a Nicholas Sparks movie. And this isn't just a one-off. In another study led by Dr. Sam Parnia, the guy who literally researches what happens after you die, people who were technically dead for up to an hour showed flickers of brain activities during CPR, not just random noise, coordinated, purposeful electrical signals, the kind that look a lot like conscious thought, which raises some uncomfortable possibilities, like, is consciousness kind of like the annoying friend who doesn't know when the party's over? Or even weirder, some of these patients came back with memories, accurate ones. One guy repeated a string of random words that had been played out loud while he was flatlined. No heartbeat, no response, but apparently still tuned in. So what's happening? Well, some neuroscientists believe that this could be the brain's final fireworks show. As oxygen drops, neurons can go into overdrive, creating vivid hallucinations. That tunnel of light, floating out of your body, feeling at peace, could be chemistry, could be something else. And that's where this gets really interesting. Because even if these experiments can be explained by science, the people who have them don't describe them like dreams. They describe them like memories, real, crystal clear, life-changing memories. So either our brains are better storytellers than we give them credit for, or they're briefly showing us something we're not supposed to be seeing. So science is still trying to catch up. But religion, myth, they've been writing the script for death for a long time. And the ideas are way more colorful than your brain fizzles out like a busted light bulb. So let's start with the ancient Egyptians, who did not mess around when it came to dying. They believed that when you died, your heart was weighed against the feather of truth. Not metaphorically, literally. A god named Anubis would plop your heart on a cosmic scale, toss a feather on the other side, and see how heavy your sins were. If your heart was light, congrats. You got into the field of reeds, which, TBH, sounds a little bit like a retirement home. But if not, you were eaten by a crocodile, lion, hippo monster named Amit. No second chances, no haunting your ex, just gone. Then there's Hinduism and Buddhism, where death is less about judgment and more about recycling. You die, you get reborn, die again, reborn again. It's like spiritual Groundhog Day. Karma decides whether you come back as a prince, a pigeon, or someone who always gets the middle seat on airplanes. But the goal isn't just to live again, it's to get out of the loop entirely, to level up and escape the cycle. In Buddhism, they've even got a manual for this, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's basically an afterlife travel guide, what to expect when you're dead and not yet reborn. And then you've got the big three, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, all slightly different spins on the idea that the soul lives on, and eventually you're going to have a cosmic performance review. In most Christian traditions, you either go up to heaven or down to hell or to purgatory, which is like a spiritual timeout, I guess. Islam's version includes vivid descriptions of paradise, rivers, gardens, peace, and hell, which is less peaceful. Judaism, it's more open-ended. Some believe in a shadowy underworld, others in a coming-of-age resurrection. Either way, death's not the end, it's the wait. And then there are the lesser-known but still excellent options. Want a Viking send-off? Die in battle. Wake up in Valhalla. Spend eternity drinking, eating, and prepping for the apocalypse. Honestly, not the worst one. Some indigenous cultures see death as a shift, not an ending, but a passing into ancestorhood. Your job isn't over. You're still around, helping out your people, whispering warnings and wisdom. And in some Chinese traditions, the afterlife has paperwork, bureaucrats, ghost courts. You might literally stand trial in the spirit world, which is somehow more stressful than being dead, I think. What's wild is even across all these differences, the core idea is the same. Something continues. Whether you're judged, recycled, reborn, or rewarded, death isn't a full stop. It's a doorway. And the more we look at near-death experiences, the more it seems like what people see when they almost die often matches with what they believe they'll see. So is the brain just showing us what we expect, or are our expectations based on something people have been glimpsing for thousands of years? Either way, what happens next is hard to explain and even harder to ignore. Okay, so we've covered what science says. We've seen what ancient beliefs suggest, but now we're heading into that murky middle ground where people don't die all the way, and they come back with stories that mess with the idea of what's real. Let's start at a place that most of us don't associate with the supernatural: hospice care. Dr. Christopher Kerr, a hospice physician, spent years listening to patients in their final days. What he found was not fear. It was visitors, not nurses or family members, but people who had already died. Over 80% of his patients reported seeing loved ones at their bedside in the days leading up to their death. These aren't hazy memories. They described full conversations, reunions, a parent sitting in a favorite chair, a spouse who passed away years ago saying, "I'll be with you soon." And these stories aren't isolated. They happened across cultures, religions, even in people who don't believe in anything. In one case, a man who had lost his daughter decades earlier said, "She's been here all week. She looks just like she did when she was little." And what do you even say to that? These visions weren't frightening. In fact, most patients describe them as deeply comforting, like someone they loved was coming back to walk them home. And then there are the moments that make hospice nurses pause. Clocks stopping the exact moment of death, a sudden chill in the room, pets, normally calm, pacing or growling at something that no one else can see, entire wings going quiet at once, even like the building knows what's happening. Not everything fits in a chart. And then we have the returners, people who flatline, are gone for several minutes, and then come back with stories. One woman in her 30s described floating above her body during emergency surgery. She gave exact details about the color of instruments, what the doctors were saying, and this is important, described a sticker on the top of the ceiling light that you could only see from above. She had never been in that room before, and obviously wasn't in a position to be doing much sightseeing during surgery. Another man who survived a car crash described being in a completely black space, peaceful, not scary, where he said he heard his grandmother's voice. She told him it wasn't his time yet. When he woke up in the hospital, his first question was whether she was okay. The nurse had to explain that she had died years earlier. There's also something called a shared death experience, which sounds made up, but it's been documented more than you'd think. That's when someone near a person who's dying, like a family member or even a hospice worker, feels like they briefly go with them. They might see a light, feel like they're moving upward, or suddenly feel detached from their own body, just for a moment. then it stops, and the person dies. The reports are uncannily consistent, even among people who never believed in anything supernatural before. Are these just tricks of the mind, grief pulling strings, or is something bigger happening, something we can't yet explain? So what happens when we die? I don't know. Maybe the brain, facing shutdown, goes out with one last emotional mixtape. Maybe it opens a door. Maybe it's both. Something the living aren't meant to fully understand, but that the dying sometimes glimpse just long enough to leave us wondering. What I think is clear is this: death is not as sterile and quiet as we've been led to believe. It's messy, it's strange, it's active, and maybe it's not just an end. We've seen what happens in the brain. Gamma waves spike, memories flooding back, mental clarity long after the body has quit. We've seen people come back with stories that don't fit any medical model. We've heard beliefs across time and culture, each one different in detail, but all whispering the same thing. Something continues. That something might be the mind's last trick. Or it might be the soul pulling back the curtain. We won't know for sure until we get there. But what's kind of beautiful is this: for all our uncertainty, the idea of death, this ultimate mystery, doesn't seem to be terrifying to the people who've brushed against it. They talk about peace, familiar voices, light, not cold, not panic, just something that feels okay. And maybe that's the point. Maybe it's less about what happens and more about how the stories we tell, scientific, spiritual, personal, help us live without being paralyzed by the one thing we'll eventually all face. So until then, all we can do is stay curious, because one day, every single one of us will find out for ourselves. And even if a fraction of these stories are true, maybe it's not the end of the story. Maybe it's just a different chapter. Thanks for listening to this episode of 10 Minute Mystery. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps other curious minds find the show. And if you're craving more stories, but with a darker twist, you can listen to my other podcast, 10 Minute Murder. See you next time.